Mr. Mahmoud Tareen, founder and CEO, the Professionals Network, Mr. Irian Siddiqui, President and Chief Executive Officer, Mizan Bank Limited, Mr. Said Amir Ali, President and CEO, Bank Islamic Pakistan Limited, Mr. Sima Kamil, Deputy Governor, State Bank of Pakistan, Mr. Yusuf Hussain, President and CEO, Faisal Bank Limited, Mr. Sirajuddin Aziz, Chief Executive Officer, Group Financial Services, Habib Bank AG Zurich, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Before I proceed any further, let me first thank the Institute of Business and Administration's Center of Excellence in Islamic Finance and the Professional Network for inviting me to share some thoughts in this conference. I am indeed honored to be given this opportunity to participate, though only virtually. Alas, these are the global realities for almost 2 years now, and we have been confined to Zoom meetings and virtual conferences. Alhamdulillah, the situation seems to have shown signs of improving, and if the trend continues, inshallah, we should be able to meet physically and rekindle our friendship more satisfactorily. Nevertheless, while we place high hopes for the return to some semblance of normalcy, we make the best of what we can in the new normal. Ladies and gentlemen, in my numerous participation in international conferences, I have often been asked how did we manage to transform Malaysia so that others can perhaps learn from us something that can be of help to you. Of course, we take pride in some of our successes as much as we are ashamed of our failures and shortcomings. Before I share some of our experiences in turning Malaysia from an agrarian nation into one that has once categorized as newly industrialized country and dubbed an Asian tiger, it is important to point out that each nation is unique. Each has its own history, demography, legacy, experience and resources, and all these need to be taken into consideration when charting the nation's direction and in preparing the development blueprints and strategies. As in the case of Malaysia, when we gained independence, we were an agrarian entity as well as a leading exporter of raw materials, particularly tin and rubber. Despite gaining independence, in the early years, our economy was almost fully influenced and functional as it was before independence. We depended on the export of rubber and tin, and these exports were as raw material without any added value. This dependence on the colonial legacy is unavoidable as our post-independence market was predetermined by the colonial masters. Apart from that, the former colonial masters continued to have the controlling stake in our rubber plantation and tin mines long after independence. Due to that, we were inevitably dependent on these foreign-owned companies for employment. If at all, we were not, our agricultural activities were confined to small holdings, cash crops, and other self-sustaining ventures. Despite this not being ideal for the psyche of a newly independent nation, it was sufficient. Luckily for us, our leaders and thinkers knew that it would not be sustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, I have pointed this out before, that one of the downsides of holding on to a pre-independence economic model, as lucrative as it may be in terms of national income, it does not address the disproportionate economic distribution of the population. Apart from that, imbalance of growth directly linked to growth centers create a lopsided economic development between urban and rural communities. Perpetuating the imbalance is the colonial legacy of divide and rule, which resulted not only in the disparity between the urban and rural, but also racially identified, meaning that certain races are accepted to be rich while the others are poor. These are a recipe for disaster. In other words, post-independence, targets of development plans cannot be only about achieving high growth, but also how it is spread among the populace. In the early years, these plans focus on the agricultural sector. To ensure the targets and objectives of these plans met, we set up specialized research institutions, agricultural financial institutions, and agriculture university and government-owned land development authorities to assist locals in building up their capacity. The capacity is not only in terms of capital, but as well as training and exposure to advanced agricultural technologies. My predecessors had laid a solid foundation, and by the time I took over the nation's leadership, things were falling into place. Ladies and gentlemen, but nothing remains static, and the changes that affect the world are often unexpected. In 1980s, during my early years as Prime Minister, natural resources and rubber, the mainstay of our economy, suffered from the ebb and flow of the international market. Further to that, industrialization promises better employment and returns while utilizing a fraction of the land compared with the large tracts needed in agriculture. The nation's population was growing at a steady rate, and land became scarce and costly to acquire. Industrialization was the only way forward, and we came up with our industrial master plan, which covered 3 phases from 1986 to 2020. But to be industrialized, we lacked the technologies and big capital. That was when foreign direct investment became key in our efforts to industrialize. We provided good infrastructures, communications, and semi-skilled workers, apart from providing attractive tax holidays and other incentives. What we wanted in return was the transfer of technology and local participation. In the 1980s, industrialization and manufacturing became our focus and the pillars for development and economic growth. That decade saw manufactured goods make up 80% of our exports, replacing raw materials. The shift proved to be good as Malaysia in the 1990s, we achieved double-digit growth and saw us progress rapidly. Ladies and gentlemen, with a buoyant economy, political stability, and progressive society, Malaysia avoided becoming a capitalist nation that only cared for the bottom line. We saw our success as the success of Muslim nation, and to qualify as one, certain traits must exist. We gathered some of the best brains from among our Islamic scholars and economists, local and foreign, to look into how we can start introducing Islamic banking and financial tools that are Sharia compliant. Our economic stability gives us credibility to pursue such efforts. We had already set up our first Islamic bank in 1983, but its focus was more on serving local Muslims. It was only a decade later, in 1993, that commercial banks, merchant banks, and finance companies were allowed to offer Islamic banking products and services under the Islamic banking scheme. Even though customers' migration to Islamic banking were initially quite slow, but it caught on, and today in Malaysia, non-Muslims too had utilized some of the financial tools offered under Islamic banking. I am asked how to promote the Islamic financial system in Muslim nations and outside. To my mind, as in our experience in Malaysia, such system is accepted only when it offers all kinds of banking services while remaining faithful to the Sharia. If the Muslim nation is stable, both economically and politically, and it chooses to introduce the Islamic financial system, it will receive public confidence. And the implementation of such a system must be accompanied by integrity and trustworthiness. The rest of it will eventually fall in place. Thank you.